The day my life changed began with chaos at Nashville Pet Emergency. My German Shepherd, Duke, had gotten into a scuffle with the tiniest Yorkshire Terrier I'd ever seen. I stood there in my dance sweats, still damp from morning practice, watching both dogs get examined. "He'll be fine, just rattled," the vet tech assured the Yorkie's owner. I couldn't stop staring at her. Tall, elegant, with auburn hair touched by silver. Her green eyes flashed with worry as she stroked her trembling pup. "I'm so sorry," I said. "Duke's usually gentle. I'm Lila." "Eloise," she replied, her voice carrying traces of a faded French accent. "Perseus here thinks he's much larger than he actually is." The waiting room was empty except for us. Duke lay at my feet while I fidgeted with my ballet company lanyard. The silence felt heavy until Eloise spoke again. "Those are interesting modifications to your practice wear," she noted, gesturing to my custom-altered leotard. "Oh, this old thing? I do my own alterations, badly, I'm afraid." She pulled out a business card, cream-colored with elegant gold lettering. Perhaps I could help with that. "I have a small atelier downtown." Small was an understatement, I would later learn. Eloise Washington's boutique was legendary in Nashville's fashion district. But that morning, I just saw a graceful woman with kind eyes and impeccable taste, whose tiny dog my clumsy shepherd had terrorized. "Let me make this up to you," I insisted. "Coffee? There's a great place around the corner." "Tea," she corrected with a slight smile. I never acquired the American coffee habit. The cafe was quiet for a Saturday morning. Eloise's stories of Parisian fashion houses had me spellbound. Her hands moved expressively as she described the intricate beadwork on vintage Dior gowns. I could have listened for hours. "And you, Cherie? What brings a young dancer to Nashville? How did you know I dance?" "The way you move, your posture. The body never lies about its training." I told her about my struggling dance company, our ambitious director, our dreams of bringing contemporary ballet to Tennessee. She listened intently, those green eyes focused entirely on me. "Passion," she said finally. "That's what I see in you. It reminds me of myself at your age." When we finally left the cafe, the autumn sun was setting. Duke had dozed off under the table while Perseus perched regally in Eloise's lap. Something had shifted during those hours of conversation, though I couldn't name it yet. "Your leotard," she reminded me, pressing her card into my hand. "Come by the shop next week, we'll see what can be done." I watched her walk away, auburn hair glowing in the golden hour light. Duke nudged my hand, and I scratched his ears absently. "Well, boy," I murmured, "maybe your bad behavior did us a favor today." Little did I know that simple card would lead me to her atelier, to countless fittings and late-night conversations, to a love story that would change both our lives. But that afternoon, I just smiled, tucked the card carefully into my dance bag, and headed home to ice my tired feet. The bell above Eloise's shop door chimed softly as I entered, arms full of dance costumes. The space was smaller than I'd imagined, but every inch breathed elegance. Vintage dress forms lined the walls, each draped in half-finished creations. "Just a moment," called that familiar French-touched voice from behind a beaded curtain. Perseus trotted out first, recognizing me with a dignified sniff. "These need help," I said when Eloise appeared, gesturing to my bundle of tired tutus and practice wear. "Our company's performance is in 3 weeks." Her fingers moved expertly over the fabric, testing seams and studying construction. "These deserve better than quick fixes," she murmured. "Who did the original work?" "Budget costumes. We're not exactly flush with funding." "Sit," she commanded, pointing to a velvet settee. "Tell me about the performance while I look these over properly." I watched her work, mesmerized by the precise movements of her hands. She pinned and marked with the focus of a surgeon, occasionally muttering in French. The afternoon light slanted through tall windows, catching the silver threads in her hair. "You learned this in Paris?" I asked. Started as an apprentice at 16. The old masters were brutal teachers, but they knew their craft. She smiled at some private memory. Worked my way up through the houses. Dior, Chanel, finally my own small atelier. Why leave Paris for Nashville? Her hands stilled briefly. Sometimes life makes choices for us. Paris became complicated. America offered a fresh start. She resumed pinning. "Your turn. How does a talented young dancer end up in Tennessee?" I told her about the small company that had taken a chance on me, about our director's vision for bringing contemporary ballet to the South. Most days I'm teaching kids classes to pay rent, I admitted. But the dreams are big. Dreams should be big, she said softly. Otherwise, what's the point? Hours slipped by. She insisted on serving proper tea in delicate cups between fittings. I learned about her years in the Paris fashion underground, about legendary midnight fashion shows in abandoned metro stations. You should come to dinner, she said suddenly. Tomorrow. I'll cook something properly French, none of this American rush food. The invitation surprised me, but I found myself accepting immediately. That night stretched into countless others, long conversations over wine and perfect coq au vin. Stories that spilled past midnight, while Perseus and Duke dozed by the fireplace. One evening, watching her demonstrate the proper way to turn a hem, I realized how much her studio had become my sanctuary. Here, I wasn't just another struggling dancer. In her eyes, I was an artist, a kindred spirit. You're distracted tonight, she noted, catching my gaze in the mirror. Thinking about how lucky Duke's bad behavior turned out to be. She laughed, that rich sound that always made my heart skip. Perseus has excellent taste in people to provoke. Now stand straight, this hem won't pin itself. I stood straighter, watching her work in the fading light. Outside, Nashville rushed by, but in here, time moved differently. Every pin, every stitch, every shared story was weaving us closer together in ways I hadn't expected. Ways that, if I was honest with myself, thrilled and terrified me in equal measure. There, she said finally, sitting back. Now you look like a proper dancer. But when our eyes met in the mirror, we both knew this was about more than just altered costumes and perfect hems. Something deeper was taking shape, as delicate and complex as the vintage lace she handled so carefully. Neither of us was ready to name it yet, but its presence filled the quiet spaces between words, between breaths, between heartbeats. Opening night loomed closer, and our small dance company was falling apart. 3 dancers had quit over missed paychecks, and our director's ambitious vision was crumbling. I stayed late after rehearsal, practicing the same sequences until my feet bled through my pointe shoes. A soft knock echoed through the empty studio. Eloise stood in the doorway holding a garment bag. Your costume is ready, she said, though I didn't expect to deliver it at midnight. I wiped sweat from my face with a towel. How did you know I'd be here? Where else would you be? She hung the bag carefully on the bar. Show me what's troubling you so much. I hesitated, then took position. The piece was a contemporary interpretation of loss, all sharp angles and suspended falls. Eloise watched intently, her eyes following every movement. When I finished, the silence felt heavy with unspoken words. Again, she said softly. But this time, dance it like you're telling me a secret. Something in her voice made my skin tingle. I began again, letting the movement flow from a deeper place. When I finished, she was closer, close enough that I could smell her signature French perfume. That's the story you need to tell, she whispered. Not just steps, truth. We stayed in the studio for hours. She watched every run-through, offering observations that cut straight to the heart. Her presence became my anchor as the company chaos swirled around us. The next evening, she appeared in the audience of our half-empty theater. I spotted her auburn hair in the 3rd row just before the lights dimmed. Knowing she was watching changed everything. I danced for her, letting each movement carry the weight of words I couldn't yet say. After the show, she waited backstage with a single red rose. Beautiful, she said simply, but her eyes held volumes more. Late that night, in her studio, we sat among the fabric swatches and dress forms. I told her about my first heartbreak at 17, a girl who chose a basketball scholarship over us. She shared her own story of lost love in Paris, a wealthy patron's daughter who couldn't brave scandal. Life has a way of teaching us what we can survive, she said, refilling our wine glasses. Is that why you left Paris? Partly. The fashion houses were changing, becoming more corporate, and there was pressure to be conventional. She traced the rim of her glass. Nashville seemed far enough to start fresh. Do you regret it? Less and less. Her gaze met mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. Perseus curled in my lap while Duke sprawled at our feet. The night stretched out like silk, full of possibilities. We talked about everything and nothing. Past loves, future dreams, the perfect way to sew a couture seam. You're different, I said finally. From anyone I've ever known. Different good or different concerning. A hint of smile played at her lips. Different like I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore. The words hung between us, heavier than I'd intended. But Eloise didn't flinch. Instead, she reached over and tucked a stray blonde curl behind my ear, her fingers lingering longer than necessary. Then it's fortunate, she said softly, that I'm not going anywhere. We stayed there until dawn painted the studio windows gold, neither of us willing to break the spell of that endless night. Something fundamental had shifted, like a key changing in music. The air felt charged with unspoken promises and possibility. The tension between Eloise and me grew with each costume fitting. Her hands would brush against my skin as she adjusted seams, lingering just a moment too long. Every touch felt electric, charged with meaning neither of us dared voice. One evening, as she pinned alterations to a new practice leotard, her fingers trembled slightly against my shoulder. The studio was quiet except for the soft patter of rain against the windows. Perseus and Duke dozed together on their cushion, an unlikely friendship born of circumstance. "Hold still," she murmured, but her voice wasn't quite steady. I caught her eye in the mirror, saw something vulnerable there that made my heart race. "You're shaking," I said softly. "The light is poor for detailed work." We both knew it was a lie. The fitting stretched on, each adjustment an excuse to maintain contact. When she finally stepped back, the loss of her touch felt physical. "There," she said. "Now turn slowly." Thunder crashed outside, making us both jump. The lights flickered once, twice, then plunged us into darkness. I heard Eloise's sharp intake of breath. "Stay there," she said. "I have candles somewhere." In the dark, I heard her moving around the studio, followed by the scratch of matches. Warm light bloomed as she lit vintage candelabras, transforming the space into something from another era. "I should go before the storm gets worse," I said, not moving. "Don't be ridiculous. The streets are flooding already." She was right. Water was rushing past the studio windows like a river. We ended up sharing a bottle of wine on the velvet settee, watching lightning illuminate the Nashville skyline. Eloise told stories about power outages in Paris, about sewing by candlelight to meet impossible deadlines. "I've never told anyone about those years," she admitted, swirling her wine. "About her. The patron's daughter?" "Sophie." The name fell like a stone between us. She was everything I thought I wanted, until she wasn't. What happened? She chose security over love. Many do. Her eyes reflected candlelight. I chose freedom instead. The storm raged on, but inside the studio, time seemed suspended. Eloise's shoulder pressed against mine, warm and solid. When she reached to brush a strand of hair from my face, her hand shook again. "We should check the weather report," I whispered. But neither of us moved. Instead, she traced my cheekbone with her fingertips, feather light. My heart thundered louder than the storm. When our eyes met, the last pretense fell away. I'm not sure who moved first. Maybe we both did. But suddenly her lips were on mine, soft and uncertain, then hungry. The kiss tasted like wine and destiny, and years of holding back. Her hands tangled in my hair as I pulled her closer, needing to erase any space between us. When we finally broke apart, breathless, the candles had burned lower. Outside, the storm was passing, but something far more powerful had broken loose inside the studio. "Lila." She breathed against my neck. Just my name, but it held volumes. We stayed wrapped together on the settee until dawn, trading kisses and whispered confessions. Every touch felt both new and inevitable, like we'd been moving toward this moment since that first day at the vet's office. Morning found us still there, Eloise's head on my shoulder, our fingers intertwined. The early light painted her auburn hair with gold, and I traced the laugh lines around her eyes with reverent fingers. "What are you thinking?" she asked, voice husky with sleep. "That I've never been happier about Duke's bad behavior." She laughed and pulled me closer. "We should send Perseus a thank you note." But we both knew it was more than luck or misbehaving pets. What had started that stormy night was as inevitable as sunrise, as natural as breathing. The only question was where it would lead us next. The morning after our first kiss felt surreal, like stepping into a dream I never wanted to wake from. Eloise and I shared quiet moments over coffee, the air thick with unspoken possibilities. But beneath the warmth, a storm was brewing, one that had nothing to do with the weather. As I prepared for rehearsal, my phone buzzed with a notification. I glanced at the screen and froze. The prestigious scholarship I had applied for had finally responded. My heart raced as I opened the email, scanning the words that could change everything. Congratulations! We are pleased to inform you that you have been awarded the scholarship to the Nashville Conservatory of Dance. However, to secure your position, you must fulfill certain conditions. I read on, my stomach sinking. The scholarship came with a catch. I had to enter into a marriage of convenience with a male student to meet the conservatory's requirements for funding. The thought of being tied to someone I didn't love felt suffocating. Eloise entered the room, her hair still tousled from sleep. "What's wrong?" she asked, concern etched on her face. I handed her my phone, watching her expression shift from curiosity to disbelief. "A marriage arrangement? Lila, this is absurd." "I know, but it's a chance to advance my career. I can't just throw it away." "At what cost?" she pressed, her voice rising. "You'd be giving up everything we've just started." I felt the weight of her words, the truth behind them. "I don't want to lose this opportunity, Eloise. But I also don't want to lose you." She stepped closer, her eyes searching mine. "You don't have to choose. There are other ways to fund your dreams. You're talented enough to find a way without sacrificing yourself." "But what if I can't?" I felt the panic rising. "What if this is my only shot?" Eloise took my hands, grounding me. "Then we'll figure it out together. You don't have to face this alone." The conversation hung heavy between us, a chasm of uncertainty. I wanted to believe her, but the fear of failure loomed large. I had always been the one to fight for my dreams, but now I felt like I was standing at a crossroads, unsure of which path to take. Later that day, I arrived at rehearsal, my mind still racing. The other dancers were buzzing with excitement about the upcoming performance, but I felt detached, like I was watching from the outside. My director, a fiery woman named Clara, noticed my distraction. "Focus, Lila, this is our moment," she snapped, her eyes narrowing. "You need to bring your A game." "I know," I replied, forcing a smile. "I'm just working through some things." "Work through it faster. We don't have time for hesitation." As the rehearsal progressed, I struggled to find my rhythm. Every leap felt heavy. Every turn lacked its usual grace. I could feel Clara's frustration mounting, but I couldn't shake the weight of the scholarship and the looming marriage. After rehearsal, I found a quiet corner to collect my thoughts. Just then, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from the male student who had been suggested as my potential husband. He wanted to meet to discuss the arrangement. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. The thought of entering into a fake marriage felt like a betrayal to everything I had with Eloise. But the scholarship was a lifeline, a chance to escape the financial struggles that had haunted me for years. That evening, I returned to Eloise's studio, my heart heavy with indecision. She was working on a new dress, the fabric flowing like water through her fingers. I watched her for a moment, captivated by her artistry. "Lila," she said without looking up, "you're quiet tonight." "I met with the guy," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Her hands stilled, and she finally met my gaze. "And? I don't know what to do. This scholarship could change everything for me." Eloise set the fabric aside and stepped closer. "What about us? What about what we've built together?" "I don't want to lose you," I said, my voice breaking. "But I also can't ignore this opportunity." She took a deep breath, her expression softening. "Then let's find a way to make it work. You deserve this chance, but not at the cost of your happiness." I felt a surge of gratitude for her understanding. "You really mean that?" "Of course. We'll figure it out together, no matter what it takes." In that moment, I realized that the path ahead wouldn't be easy. But with Eloise by my side, I felt a flicker of hope. We would navigate this storm together, and somehow, we would find a way to keep our dreams alive without sacrificing what we had just begun to build. The coffee shop felt sterile and wrong as I sat across from James, the conservatory's suggested husband-to-be. He was perfectly pleasant, a music student with kind eyes and an easy smile. That somehow made it worse. "So," he said, stirring his latte, "we both need this funding. It doesn't have to be complicated." I nodded, twisting my napkin. Just a paper marriage. 2 years, then we both get what we need. Exactly. I can keep dating my boyfriend, you keep your private life private. His meaningful look told me he understood more than I'd said. The plan was simple enough. Share an apartment on paper, maintain separate lives in reality. The conservative board members would have their traditional appearance, and we'd have our careers. But walking home, every step felt heavier. When I reached Eloise's studio, I couldn't make myself go in. Instead, I watched through the window as she worked, her hands moving with practiced grace over fabric. She looked up, sensing my presence. The sadness in her eyes as she turned away broke something in me. The next few weeks passed in a blur of rehearsals and wedding preparations. Eloise withdrew into herself, spending longer hours at the studio. When we did talk, the conversations felt hollow, like we were both playing parts in a tragedy we couldn't stop. One evening, I found her working late, Perseus curled at her feet. The studio was dim, just a single lamp illuminating her workspace. "The alterations are finished," she said without looking up. "Your wedding dress will be ready next week." "Eloise, please." "What would you have me say, Lila?" Her voice cracked slightly. "That I'm happy to watch you marry someone else?" I moved closer, needing to bridge the growing distance between us. "It's not real, you know that." She finally met my eyes. "It feels real enough." The space between us crackled with tension. Before I could stop myself, I crossed the room and pulled her into a desperate kiss. She responded instantly, her hands tangling in my hair as she pressed me against the workbench. We made love there in the studio, surrounded by half-finished dresses and moonlight. Every touch felt like a promise, every kiss a declaration of what we couldn't say aloud. When it was over, we lay wrapped together on the velvet settee, her heartbeat steady against my back. "I can't lose you," I whispered into the darkness. "You already are," she replied softly, and I felt tears dampen my shoulder. The engagement party was a masterclass in pretense. James played his part perfectly, his arm around my waist as we thanked well-wishers. Eloise attended as my dear friend, the costume designer who'd graciously offered to make my wedding dress. I watched her across the room, elegant in vintage Dior, making small talk with the conservatory board members. Only I could see how her hands shook slightly when she lifted her champagne glass. Later that night, I escaped to the balcony, needing air. James found me there, looking as trapped as I felt. "We can still call this off," he said quietly, "and lose everything we've worked for? Maybe some things are worth more than success." I thought of Eloise in her studio, of quiet mornings with Perseus and Duke, of the life we'd begun building before this all started. The tears came without warning. "Hey," James squeezed my shoulder. "Whatever you decide, I've got your back." Inside, the party continued. I could see Eloise through the window, her auburn hair catching the light. She was smiling at something a board member said, but I knew that smile. It was the one she wore when she was protecting herself. The weight of the engagement ring felt like chains. In trying to secure my future, I was watching my present crumble. The worst part was, I wasn't sure anymore which choice would hurt more, going through with the marriage or walking away from my dreams. As the evening wound down, I watched Eloise slip away early, Perseus tucked under her arm. She didn't look back, and somehow that felt like the loudest goodbye of all. The wedding dress fitting was scheduled for a quiet Tuesday morning. I stood in Eloise's studio, surrounded by mirrors that reflected my discomfort from every angle. The dress was perfect, of course it was. Every stitch spoke of Eloise's mastery, her attention to detail, her love. "Stand still," she murmured, pins held between her lips as she adjusted the hem. Her hands were steady, professional, but I could feel them trembling slightly whenever they brushed my skin. "It's beautiful," I whispered, watching her work. "It should be. I've made hundreds of wedding dresses." Her voice was carefully neutral, though never quite like this. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words. In the corner, Perseus watched us with knowing eyes, while Duke dozed nearby, oblivious to the tension. "I found something interesting while researching the conservatory's history," Eloise said suddenly, her hands stilling on the fabric. "About 30 years ago, there was another dancer, talented, promising. She made a similar choice." I caught her eye in the mirror. "What happened to her?" "She married for a scholarship, left her partner, became a principal dancer." Eloise's voice cracked slightly. That dancer was me. The confession hung in the air like smoke. I turned to face her, the dress rustling softly. You never told me. Because I know exactly what you're feeling. The pull between art and love, between dreams and truth. She straightened, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. I chose the safe path, and I've regretted it every day since. What happened to her? Your partner? Marie? Eloise smiled sadly. She went to London, became a choreographer, married someone who wasn't afraid to love her openly. I saw her once, years later. She looked happy. My throat felt tight. Why are you telling me this now? Because I wish someone had told me then, that success means nothing if you have to hide who you are to achieve it. She touched my cheek gently. I lost myself trying to be what others wanted. It took years to find my way back. I leaned into her touch, feeling tears spill onto the pristine white fabric. I'm so scared of failing. You're already succeeding. You're dancing, your spirit, that's what makes you special, not some scholarship. The dress suddenly felt suffocating. I reached for the zipper, needing to escape its perfect prison. Eloise helped me step out of it, careful even now not to damage her creation. I can't do this, I said, my voice breaking. I can't marry him. Then don't. The simplicity of her response undid me completely. I collapsed into her arms, sobbing against her shoulder while she held me tight. All the pressure, all the fear and uncertainty of the past weeks poured out. I need to leave, I said finally, pulling back to meet her gaze. Right now, will you come with me? She nodded, already reaching for her keys. We left the wedding dress draped over a mannequin, a beautiful ghost of what might have been. Perseus and Duke followed as we rushed down the stairs, our footsteps echoing in the empty building. The evening air hit us like freedom as we emerged onto the street. Without discussion, we headed for my car. The engagement party was starting across town, but we drove in the opposite direction, toward the outskirts of Nashville where the city faded into rolling hills. We ended up at Eloise's favorite overlook, watching the sun set over the city. She held my hand as I called James, then my director, then finally the conservatory. Each call felt like removing a chain, letting me breathe easier. What now? I asked, as darkness fell. Eloise squeezed my hand. Now we write our own story without hiding any chapters. Looking at her profile in the gathering dusk, I knew she was right. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't following your dreams, it's being honest about what those dreams really are. The conservatory board meeting room felt colder than I remembered. Sitting across from 5 stern faces, I gripped Eloise's hand under the table for strength. Miss Bryant, this is highly irregular, the chairman began, shuffling papers. The terms of your scholarship were quite clear. They were clear about marriage being a requirement, I agreed, but unclear about why my artistic merit depends on who I love. A murmur rippled through the board members. The youngest, Dr. Carter, leaned forward. The conservatory has certain traditional values to uphold. Traditional values won't fill your theaters. Eloise spoke up, her French accent more pronounced with emotion. Talent will. And you're about to lose one of your most gifted dancers over outdated rules. Miss Washington, with all due respect. I've worked with dancers across Europe's finest companies, she interrupted. Lila has that same spark, but talent withers when forced into shadows. I squeezed her hand, drawing courage from her presence. I won't hide who I am anymore. If that costs me the scholarship, so be it. The chairman's expression hardened. Then I believe we have nothing more to discuss. Walking out felt like both an ending and a beginning. The Nashville sunshine hit my face, warming away the chill of that sterile room. Eloise pulled me close, pressing a kiss to my temple. I'm proud of you, she whispered. That evening at our company's fundraising gala, I took the stage for an unscheduled performance. The piece was raw, unpolished, a dance about breaking free, about choosing truth over security. When I finished, the silence was deafening. Then, from the back of the theater, someone started clapping. Others joined in, the applause building to a thunderous wave. Through tears, I saw Eloise standing, her face radiant with pride. Afterward, a woman approached us at the reception. That was extraordinary, she said, introducing herself as the director of an underground arts collective. We fund artists who push boundaries, who tell real stories. Would you be interested in applying for our grant program? More people gathered around, offering support, connections, possibilities I hadn't imagined. A local LGBTQ Arts Foundation representative handed me her card. "We need voices like yours," she said simply. James appeared, champagne in hand. To authentic living, he toasted, his boyfriend beside him, and to dodging bullets disguised as opportunities. As the night wore on, I found myself surrounded by a different kind of family. Artists, dreamers, truth-tellers. They shared stories of their own battles, their own choices to live openly despite the cost. Later, in Eloise's studio, we slow danced among the dress forms and fabric swatches. Perseus and Duke watched from their usual spot, unlikely friends who'd helped write our love story. "No regrets?" she asked softly. Only that I hesitated so long. I rested my head on her shoulder. "You were right about success meaning nothing if you have to hide." "I had to learn that lesson the hard way," she murmured. "Some sacrifices cost too much." The moon painted silver patterns through the windows, turning the studio into our private ballroom. Outside, Nashville hummed with possibility. We'd lost a scholarship but gained something far more valuable, the freedom to dance our own dance, tell our own story. "What happens now?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Eloise smiled, that special smile that still made my heart skip. "Now, my dear, we create something new, something true." And there, in the moonlit studio where our story began, we continued writing our next chapter together. No more hiding, no more pretending. Just two artists, two hearts, and a future as bright as stage lights. Life has a way of rearranging itself when you finally stop fighting your truth. After walking away from the conservatory, Eloise and I spent days reimagining our future. The ideas flowed as naturally as her designs, as fluid as my dance movements. What if we combined our arts? She mused one morning, sketching in her notebook. A space where dance and fashion intersect. I watched her hands move across the paper, creating something new. "You mean sharing your studio?" "More than that. A complete fusion costume design that moves with dancers, practice spaces that double as fitting rooms." Her eyes sparkled with possibility. "We could create something Nashville hasn't seen before." The idea took root, growing stronger with each passing day. We spent hours planning, measuring the studio space, discussing renovations. Eloise's elegant workroom gradually transformed, making space for ballet bars and mirrors alongside her dress forms. One evening, as we cleared old storage boxes, she pulled me close. The setting sun painted everything gold, and the moment felt perfect. We made love among half-packed boxes and renovation plans, celebrating our shared future. Every touch felt like a promise, every kiss a confirmation that we'd chosen right. The Arts Collective proved true to their word, providing initial funding for our venture. Local dancers started dropping by, curious about our unique combination of costume design and dance space. Eloise's reputation drew fashion clients, while my connections in the dance world brought performers seeking both training space and custom costumes. "It's actually working," I said one day, watching a contemporary dance troupe rehearse in costumes Eloise had designed specifically for their movement style. She squeezed my hand. "Of course it is. We're doing what we love, together." Perseus and Duke had their own corner now, complete with custom beds Eloise designed. They'd become the studio mascots, greeting clients with their odd couple charm. The sight of a tiny Yorkshire Terrier bossing around a German Shepherd never failed to make visitors smile. We worked long hours, but they never felt like work. I'd teach morning classes, then help Eloise with fittings. She'd sketch during my rehearsals, finding inspiration in the movement. Our arts began to blend. Her designs influenced by dance, my choreography shaped by the flow of fabric. Late one night, as we lay tangled together in sheets, Eloise traced patterns on my skin. "Remember when you thought you needed that scholarship to succeed?" I turned to face her, touching the silver in her hair that I'd grown to love so much. I needed something else entirely. What was that? The courage to be myself, to love without hiding. I kissed her softly. "You gave me that." She smiled against my lips. "You gave me something too, a second chance to choose love over fear." Our studio became known as a safe space, where artists could be themselves while pursuing their craft. Young dancers who'd felt out of place elsewhere found a home with us. Eloise's designs celebrated all bodies, all forms of expression. We hosted our first showcase on a warm spring evening. The studio transformed into a performance space, with clients and students presenting work that merged fashion and dance in ways that felt entirely new. As I watched Eloise adjust a costume between acts, her hands sure and gentle, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. We'd built something beautiful together, something true to who we were. Later that night, after the last guest left, we danced slowly in our empty studio. No music played. We moved to the rhythm of our breathing, of our hearts beating in sync. "Happy?" she asked, her green eyes reflecting moonlight. More than I knew was possible. I rested my head on her shoulder. "Thank you for helping me find my way. Thank you for being brave enough to take it." Outside, Nashville nightlife hummed with energy. Inside our studio, we'd created our own world, one where love and art flowed together as naturally as breath. We'd found our perfect fit in more ways than one. The gallery opening loomed ahead, golden light spilling onto the Nashville sidewalk. I gripped Eloise's hand tighter as we approached the entrance. Inside, her sister Catherine waited, the first family member either of us would face together. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, noticing how Eloise's shoulders had tensed. 20 years is long enough to hide from family," she replied softly. "Besides, I'm proud of what we've built." The gallery buzzed with Nashville's art crowd, drawn by our unique fusion of dance and fashion. Photographs of dancers wearing Eloise's designs lined the walls, capturing moments of pure artistic freedom. We spotted Catherine immediately, tall and elegant like Eloise, with the same auburn hair, though hers had fewer silver strands. She stood before a photo of me dancing in one of Eloise's creations, studying it intently. "Hello, Catherine," Eloise said quietly. Her sister turned, green eyes widening. For a moment, no one moved. Then Catherine stepped forward and pulled Eloise into a fierce hug. "You damn stubborn fool," she whispered. "Why did you stay away so long?" I thought. "After everything with Papa." "Papa's been gone 10 years, Eloise, and he was wrong about so many things." I watched them together, seeing years of pain and misunderstanding begin to heal. Catherine turned to me with a warm smile. "So, you're the dancer who finally brought my sister home." The evening flowed more easily after that. Catherine shared stories of their childhood in Paris, making Eloise laugh in a way I'd never heard before. Perseus and Duke charmed everyone, their unlikely friendship a perfect metaphor for our unconventional family. "Your parents would have loved this," Catherine said later, gesturing at the photographs. "Mama always said you had a gift for seeing beauty others missed." Eloise squeezed my hand. "Sometimes it takes the right person to help you see clearly." The holiday season arrived with a dusting of snow, rare for Nashville. Catherine insisted we host Christmas dinner at the studio, transforming our workspace into a celebration of found family. James came with his boyfriend, bringing mulled wine and acceptance. Several dancers from our collective joined, along with clients who'd become friends. Perseus and Duke wore ridiculous holiday bow ties Eloise had made them. "To new traditions," Catherine toasted, raising her glass. "And to love that breaks down walls." Later, after everyone had gone, Eloise and I slow danced among the remnants of dinner. Holiday lights twinkled off the mirrors, creating endless reflections of our happiness. "I never thought I'd have this," she murmured against my hair. "Family, acceptance, love, all of it. We built it together," I reminded her. "Step by step, stitch by stitch." She pulled back to look at me, her green eyes bright with emotion. "You know what Catherine told me tonight? She said she's never seen me so completely myself." "That's because you are. We both are." The snow fell softly outside our windows, blanketing Nashville in quiet beauty. Inside, we had created our own warmth, our own belonging. A chosen family built on understanding, creativity, and unconditional love. "Merry Christmas, my love," Eloise whispered, pulling me closer. I melted into her embrace, knowing we had found something rare and precious. A love that let us be exactly who we were meant to be. Together, we had crafted not just a business or a relationship, but a true home for our hearts. Spring sunshine streamed through the renovated studio windows as we prepared for our first major showcase. The space had been transformed. One side displaying Eloise's latest collection, the other set up for dance performances. The perfect fusion of our arts. "Everything ready?" Eloise called from behind a curtain, making final adjustments to a costume. "Almost." I watched dancers warming up in her designs, each piece moving like liquid poetry. Can you believe we're here? The showcase was more than just a performance. It was a celebration of our journey. Local press had picked up the story of our unique venture, dubbing it Nashville's most innovative fusion of fashion and dance. Perseus and Duke supervised from their corner, now featuring a custom-built platform where they could watch both the workroom and dance space. They'd become minor celebrities in their own right, with clients specifically requesting their approval of designs. "Places, everyone," I called, feeling the familiar pre-show energy build. The audience filed in, a mix of Nashville's art community, dance enthusiasts, and fashion clients. Catherine sat front row, beaming with pride. Even some conservatory board members attended, though they tried to look disapproving. The show began with my solo piece, wearing Eloise's masterwork, a dress that seemed to capture light and movement in its very fabric. As I danced, I felt every stitch, every careful detail she'd crafted with love. The performance flowed seamlessly between dance and fashion, each element enhancing the other. Dancers emerged from behind dress forms, costumes transformed on stage, and the boundary between movement and design disappeared completely. For the finale, Eloise joined me on stage, something she'd resisted until the last minute. But there she was, elegant in vintage Dior, demonstrating the art of draping fabric while I danced around her. The audience fell silent, mesmerized by our synchronized performance. The applause was thunderous. As we took our bows, I saw tears in Eloise's eyes matching my own. We'd created something entirely new, something uniquely ours. Later that night, after the crowds had gone, we stood in our empty studio. The dress forms cast long shadows in the moonlight, and the dance floor still held echoes of the evening's energy. "I have something for you," Eloise said softly, pulling out a small box. Inside lay a delicate gold ring, vintage like so much of what she loved. "I thought we could make it official," she whispered. "No hiding, no pretending, just us, exactly as we are." The private ceremony was held in the studio where our story began. I wore a dress Eloise had spent months creating, while she chose a perfectly tailored suit. Perseus served as ring-bearer, with Duke as his unlikely escort. Catherine officiated, her voice carrying clearly through the space we'd built together. "Love, like art, knows no boundaries," she said. "It flows where it will, creating beauty in unexpected places." Our vows were simple, promises to support each other's dreams, to dance through life together, to always choose truth over fear. When we kissed, the small gathering of our chosen family erupted in cheers. The studio evolved with us, becoming more than just a workspace. We opened The Perfect Fit, a performing arts boutique that celebrated all forms of artistic expression. Young dancers found mentorship, designers discovered inspiration, and everyone found acceptance. One evening, as sunset painted the windows gold, I watched Eloise adjust a costume on a nervous young dancer. Her hands moved with the same grace I'd fallen in love with, gentle and sure. "Better?" she asked the dancer, who nodded enthusiastically. "Perfect," I said from across the room, and Eloise looked up, catching my eye with a smile that still made my heart skip. We had found our perfect fit, in our art, in our love, in the life we'd built together. Every day brought new challenges, new creations, new reasons to be grateful for that fateful day, when two misbehaving dogs brought us together. In the end, we'd written our own story, choreographed our own dance, designed our own pattern for happiness, and it fit us exactly right,